Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Becoming Us. This is a program brought to you by BetterHelp, a provider of virtual therapy sessions. And with me is Hillary Stover. She is the therapist for this session in September. Well, if you've been following on, this is the third month of a 5-month program focusing on who we're becoming in this new normal. So just to recap, if you recall in July, we talked a lot about loneliness, fear, and anxiety. And what we learned was anxiety is like a rocking chair. It keeps moving, but it doesn't get us anywhere. And then in August, we talked a lot about relationships, and we learned that even though there's so many superficial ones out there, particularly across social media, the ones that we are engaging with, the ones that we are engaging in, the few that we're engaging in, we're actually getting deeper and closer. And this month, we're going to focus on parenting in a pandemic and how this major event is changing us as parents. So I want to talk about 3 approaches to our emotions and our circumstances as parents. And this is based on what the themes that were appearing and emerging across the last couple of months. And so some of you will remember this, and this will also be a good recap for those who are now just joining us for the first time. So there are 3 approaches, and one, it's inward before outward. So are we looking inward and examining our hearts? So many of you know that I love this movie, Let There Be Dragons, and I often quote the protagonist: before you rush out, before you try to change the world, first think about changing yourself. So are we reflecting and thinking about forgiveness and gratefulness inwardly, so we can have an outward approach or posture of forgiveness and gratefulness? Number 2, it's really easy to be angry these days at our friend, at our spouse, at our children. And my younger sister, once told me that when we're in disagreement, when we get angry, we shouldn't look to the other person as the enemy. We should come together on the same side and then be united in our fight against the issue, not the person. And third, what are we doing with this time given to us? Many of you also hear me talk about or refer to Lord of the Rings, and when Gandalf says to Frodo, what are you doing with the time given to you? So as you watch this video, because we always play a video to show you about all these major events that have happened in our life, and particularly the one that's happening now, think about these 3 things. 1, are you looking inwardly? 2, are you addressing issues as opposed to getting mad at someone? And 3, what are you doing with this time given to you? So are you sharing your gratefulness? Are you sharing forgiveness? And are you sharing your gifts? So you saw one of the slides there was how can we learn from our shared suffering? And this is an unprecedented time of shared suffering because so much has been taken away from all of us. So I'm hoping that during this time too, that we could also have shared learning. And as we share our stories of challenges, but also joys and lessons, that's not only helpful to each one of us, but it's helpful to each one of us individually, but helpful to all of us. So I am going to get started by bringing Hillary in because she's going to be leading the discussion today. Hillary is a therapist at BetterHelp. And just briefly, BetterHelp is a provider of virtual therapy sessions. They have thousands of therapists across the country, Hillary being one of them, and she hosts a number of these webinar sessions that we're having right now. They're a little bit different, but somewhat similar. BetterHelp therapists are also far more convenient because you can access them and interact with them asynchronously or synchronously on video, and especially in your own home. And then for anyone who wants to try BetterHelp for free, you can do so, and I will send an email to everyone after this session. But BetterHelp is sponsoring this, and I'm very grateful to them. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Hillary, and she's going to kick us off.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me try get this pulled up for you. So as Bambi mentioned, I'm Hillary Stover. I am a licensed clinical social worker in South Carolina. So it is past 2 o'clock where I am now. But I'm glad we're here. I have enjoyed all of the sessions we've done so far with Bambi, and I think the question that I hear her ask and mention kind of over and over again is, what are we doing with this time given to us? And I think that is so incredibly powerful when we think about our time as parents. So I am a parent myself, not just a therapist. I have a 7-year-old and an almost 5-year-old, but she's 4. And my oldest actually went back to school this week. She's doing an A-B schedule. So she's in school one day and home the next. And, you know, a lot of these days have seemed like they were never ending, and they were so long between juggling work and juggling homeschooling and juggling a husband who's now working from home and kind of in our space, juggling the kids not having their activities. But I got to tell you, now that she's back in school, even just every other day, those 173 days that she was home during the pandemic does not seem like enough. A lot of reflecting kind of going on this week where just it wasn't enough. And so I think that question of what are we doing with this time given to us, right? Yeah, some of the things we want have been taken away. But in terms of family, it might be kind of what we need. And so that's what we're here to talk about today is, you know, how do we make the most out of this time given to us? How do we become not only resilient for ourselves, but also for our children? And how do we become kind of the strongest parents and the strongest families we can, even during this time that really fosters a lot of anxiety? So today we're going to look at how our thoughts and how our behaviors can lead to finding balance and finding calm during this pandemic. You know, so as you may know, this is kind of a 2-part series in September, and today I want to focus a lot on the resiliency as us as parents, but obviously as a parent, the child comes in too, so we can talk about that as well. So when we look at our thoughts and our behaviors, this is a diagram to kind of start to get us started. It's just a foundational framework that a lot of us therapists use. You don't have to worry about kind of the fancy words of it being cognitive behavioral therapy, but essentially what it looks at is we have a situation like a pandemic or like a 4-year-old screaming, and we have a thought that goes on about that situation. And based on what we think and we feel, and then we behave a certain way. And so this connection is so incredibly powerful every moment of our life. You know, not just as parents, but just as human beings. It is a essential foundation of kind of how we are all connected And so, you know, an everyday occurrence in my house, and I think I've shared this with Bambi before, is just, I have a 4-year-old and she's very, very loud. If she's happy, she's loud. If she is sad, she's loud. If she's excited, she's loud. If she's tired, she's loud. She just has a loud volume. But even before the pandemic, I was working from home with BetterHelp, but I was not used to working from home with my children and my husband being from home. And when the whole pandemic started, I could feel myself getting very, very frustrated, feeling very defeated, feeling very anxious, feeling angry almost of sorts. And I was really frustrated with how loud she was being. I'd be frustrated with her and think, why can't she just be more respectful, even though she's 4? I'd be frustrated with her older sister and think, why can't she just help her be quiet? Or maybe my husband, of why can't he just make them be quiet? But all I felt was anxious and angry and defeated and frustrated. And that situation of her being loud, it was how I thought about it that directly impacted how I felt. And so I had to kind of take a step back and realize, what is my perspective on this? And when I was able to shift my perspective to how amazing is it that I get to witness her joy over building something at Legos? How amazing is it that I can hear her from the other room and hear all these experiences that she's having and all of her happiness and all of her sadness? How cool is it that I get to experience this through being at home right now, rather than her being in preschool, or rather her being with our typical caregiver at that time? And so I know it's kind of a very basic example, but it shows how our thoughts and our behaviors and our emotions are truly intertwined. And so when I was able to think of it differently from a much more helpful and healthy way, I was able to then change our behaviors and realize, okay, if she's going to be loud and we're going to embrace it, what can we do? How can I get her energy out before I have a session where I need her to be quiet? Or how can I let her know that I'm going to devote some time to her after my work? Or how can I choose as the adult to reposition myself in the home to a much more quieter and more confidential place? And so again, it's a very basic example, but truly by these small changes in our thoughts and our behaviors throughout our day, we can truly lead to changes in how we feel as a parent, not just during a pandemic, but throughout our entire life as a parent. And so parenting during this pandemic truly has brought some incredible opportunities for growth, personally and within our family, for mindfulness and just for presence and being present with our children and present with our family. And so a few adaptations of how we think and what we do can make us make the most out of this time given to us and take the most advantage out of this opportunity. And so again, you know, with that being said, it might be helpful as I'm talking about this, if you have some thoughts pop up that you realize that you get frustrated from working from home, or you get frustrated with kind of family and limited activities during this, take a moment, you know, jot down some notes on your thoughts if I kind of trigger any thoughts as we're talking, and we'll definitely come back to it at the end of this. Because moving forward as a parent during this pandemic, it's important to think, what do you think about? You know, how are you feeling? And what are you actually thinking on your day-to-day basis? Is it, I cannot get everything done, and then you feel overwhelmed and anxious? Is it, you know, my children won't be safe, and thus we feel anxious or fearful? Or my kids have too much screen time and I'm a horrible parent, so then we feel depressed and anxious and guilty. And so, you know, for a moment as we go through these slides, I do want you to try to think about thinking in the back of your mind. Oftentimes we know exactly how we feel, but oftentimes we don't think about what we're thinking. And so if any of these thoughts pop up as we are talking, I definitely encourage you to write them down so we can come back to them as we go throughout this presentation and then have our chat afterwards. So I just want you to be thinking about thinking. Okay. And at any time, if I share today and, you know, your story relates to any of this, we're definitely going to come back to it. And so let's talk about thoughts just briefly. But, you know, our thoughts are not good or bad. They're not right or wrong. It's helpful to look at, is my thought helpful? Is my thought healthy? Is my thought helping me feel how I want to feel, or helping me engage with my children the way I want to engage with my children? Throughout this pandemic, I've met so many parents, both on a professional and a personal level. And so often I hear that thought of, I can't control this, or so much is out of my control, or I can't control anything right now with my kids' school. And that's true. There is so much that is out of our control with the pandemic. What the CDC recommends or what others do in public regards to social distancing or wearing a mask, or what our school district or our companies decide that we can do. But there's still so much we can control. And so when we focus on what we can control as a parent, as a partner, as a coworker, it's helpful to approach this period of great uncertainty and find certainty in our days. As Bambi was showing that video in the beginning, all I kept thinking is, holy smokes, we are a very resilient country. We have gone through a lot. And we're very resilient parents, and we have incredibly resilient children. And one way that we can focus on that resiliency is to really focus on what we can control. Because during these uncertain times, part of what leads to the worry, part of what leads to this anxiety that we feel as parents is the uncertainty of thinking that we are out of control or we are helpless. And so it can be really helpful to focus on what we can control right now in the present. So one thought I do encourage you to think about today and, every day moving forward is, today I can control. Maybe you can control how you react to your children. Maybe you can control parts of your environment at home. Maybe you can control limiting your own exposure to the news or social media posts or parts of your own self-care. And so again, a huge factor for resiliency for human beings in general, but particularly as parents, is really just focusing on what you do actually have control over, and then working on those things. And again, this pandemic has truly ripped a lot of that control away from us as parents, but we also have a lot we can control. So when we don't know what's coming, and there's so much uncertainty, balancing that anxiety with that control as parents within our homes creates a predictable world, not just for us, but also for I apologize for my dogs, part of working from home as well. Predictable for ourselves and our families and our children. And so by focusing on all that we can control, it really does create this predictable environment for not just us, but our children. And so I encourage you to think about that and take a moment and jot some ideas down, because we can always come back to it, but really looking at what I can control. Today I have control over this. And there's some other thoughts that often I've found pop up a lot with parents. A lot of guilt, a lot of judgment that we're not perfect. We're not the perfect parent. Some of you in here might be beating yourself up for not being perfect, or thinking you're doing a miserable job, or failing at parenting during a pandemic between home life and parenting and work and school and everything else that was kind of thrown at us. And if you find yourself having these thoughts, it's helpful to realize it's okay to not be perfect. I have never yet so far met the perfect parent. And I know a lot of pretty stellar parents, but I haven't never met a perfect one. And sure, we have stress from being overscheduled and being overworked and maybe not feeling like we have enough time in our day. But some of that stress and some of that anxiety certainly comes from how we think about it, and that guilt and judgment that some of us might place on ourselves. And so it's an imperfect situation. And so to expect ourselves to be perfect at it is kind of unrealistic. I'm not doing it perfectly. I can assure you of that. And it's okay. It's more than okay. So one way to find that acceptance and find that grace for ourselves is by releasing that judgment, releasing that guilt that we might be putting on ourselves if we're yelling more or having more screen time for our kids that we would like, or, not having as many home cooked meals. And so it's really important not just to think, okay, well, I'm not perfect, right? But to look at, then what are we doing well? It's not just the power of positive thinking, but looking at, okay, yeah, maybe I dropped a few balls, but today something I did well was. And so that's another really helpful thought to think of as a parent, is reflecting back on your day at the end of the day and thinking, today I did something well. Maybe my kids had a healthy dinner, or maybe I took them on a walk, or maybe I managed several different tasks at once without losing my cool. But thinking of today, something I did well was. And then if you want to even improve on that further, you can add in that thought of, and tomorrow I want to improve on. Tomorrow I want to do better at this. And similar can also be helpful to really think about what we're grateful for. The power of gratitude is incredibly important. It's incredibly powerful on our thoughts and our daily perspectives. It's shown drastically to improve our mood and have multiple positive effects when we just focus on the simple act of gratitude and what am I grateful for? And it doesn't have to be earth-shattering. It can be, I'm grateful for an old friend sending me a text message and reaching out, or a nice walk, or a sunset, or a nice lunch. But just one thing that you're grateful for every day. Technology, family, being healthy today, even though we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Finding that gratitude can be so incredibly helpful. And so again, I encourage you, as you share with us and share your story, if you have some things you're grateful for, it would be so powerful for all of us to hear that, because the power of gratitude is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So again, it's not just looking at the power of positive thinking and that everything's great in the world and that this is all wonderful, because obviously there are really challenging parts as a parent, even without a pandemic, let alone then throw a pandemic onto it. But it's looking at how can I shift my perspective and think about this a little bit differently that might be more helpful. It might be a little bit more healthy or make me feel how I want to feel. And 3 simple universal thoughts that I really find are really focusing on, today I can control, today something I did well was, and today I am grateful for. If you want to take it a step forward, even incorporating your kids with that, every night at dinner, we talk about what we're grateful for that day. We focus on those positive aspects, because not only then does it help me keep my perspective and my emotions in check, but it helps me also then model that for my kids and model for my children how to find gratitude and how to find some of the positive perspective, even when they don't have all their activities or they can't see all their friends they want to see. And so that power of gratitude, again, can be really, really helpful. Similar to our thoughts, what we do also greatly impacts what we think, and then also how we feel, and in turn, how our children feel. And so not only do we want to focus on our thoughts, but we also really want to focus on our behaviors and kind of what we do throughout our day. And so it might be helpful to look at how do we find resilience? How do we find this resilience to manage stress, right? This is a stressful time. It's an unprecedented time. And it's important to take care of ourselves and support our children. It kind of goes back to the old saying of, you can't pour from an empty cup. And as parents, we have to refill our cup. And so there are behaviors we can do and thoughts we can do to really help boost that resiliency and really help us manage stress. And then also help us model that for our kids as well, so they learn how to become more resilient in this time that is truly just fostering a lot of anxiety. And so it's important to remember you're not alone. It's one thing I love about doing groupinars with BetterHelp, and it's one thing I've loved about joining this Becoming Us series, is that it really shows that from all walks of life, from all over the world, we're not alone. Even if the struggles are different, they also have an underlying theme and they're very similar. A lot of people have the same fears and worries as us. So find someone to talk to, find someone that you can just vent to how you're feeling. Listen to them, just be with them. But recognizing we're not alone and figuring out how to reach out for those supports and for our kids to reach out for those supports. Avoiding social media that makes us feel panicked. Technology and social media can be a great way for staying in contact, for staying connected with people that we are unable to maybe see, whether they're far away or even close, but we can't see due to social distancing or places closing. But it's also important to avoid the social media posts that make you feel panicked, right? And so again, it kind of goes back to what we can and cannot control. From a behavioral standpoint, where we can't control what other people post on social media, or how they choose to present themselves on social media and what aspects of their day they want us to see. But we absolutely can control how we react and how we spend our time on social media. And by modeling this, not only does it help us build our own resiliency to kind of the social media and digital world, but we also guide our children in limiting that anxiety and limiting how they interact socially, whether that's through gaming or through social media use. Taking a break is going to be really important. We might find we don't have time for a break in our day between work and kids and homeschooling, but we all need a break. We all need a break sometime. So planning that into your day, we're going to talk about making a routine here shortly, but planning a break time into your day. So whether that's when your children are asleep, do something fun or relaxing just for yourself, even if it's just 15 minutes. Make a list of healthy activities that you like to do. And if you're too tired by the time your kids go to bed, which I am because I'm an early riser, so by the time they go to bed, I'm done. Plan some time into your routine. Plan some time into finding time for self-care, and plan some time for your kids to do that as well. We're going to talk about here in a couple moments kind of how stress impacts our body on a physiological level, and planning that calm time into our day for 30 minutes. Hypothetically, let's just say 2 o'clock, we're going to plan for calm time for the whole family. When the whole house just takes time to be calm, engage in a calming activity, whether that's yoga or some breathing or some mindfulness that we'll talk about, reading a book, but 30 minutes, that is a family time to be calm. Not only does it help us build our resiliency and manage our stress, but it helps our children learn, hey, we have to kind of implement this into our daily routine in order to manage our stress so it doesn't escalate totally out of the way. Okay, so that can be another helpful thing. If you notice that your anxiety is rising, then go on to take an extra break. But sometimes we beat ourselves up over breaks and we think we don't have time for it, or we don't deserve it because I got to respond to these emails. But we do need it. We need it to be more effective and more efficient on a daily basis. And using mindfulness to manage your anxiety throughout the day can be incredibly helpful in staying present as parents, staying present at work when we might have multiple distractions going on outside the door of our office. And so we're going to learn 2 skills briefly today that hopefully you guys can take home with you if you've never done them before. And so you just walk away with a skill that's going to help you to stay grounded, manage some of that anxiety and some of that resilience, particularly during this stressful time. It is important to note, however, with anxiety, I've talked a lot about anxiety as parents during this pandemic, but anxiety in and of itself is not a bad thing. And so a lot of times I'll hear parents and just friends and clients say, I don't want to be anxious. Well, anxiety in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's actually a very healthy emotion. It forces us to focus on issues at hand. It's why I put my seatbelt on every time I get in the car. It can push us to wear a mask or be vigilant about hand washing and hand hygiene, or maybe budgeting for the future if we've had some financial constraints due to COVID. So anxiety in and of itself can actually be very, very helpful. And it can be helpful to keep us on track as a parent and manage all these different tasks. But sometimes when that anxiety grows out of control, it can come from our thoughts and those irrational thoughts or those really extreme thoughts. And again, that's when that thinking comes into play. But it can also come from our body physically going into stress overdrive. So I could talk about this for an entire hour. So I'm going to give you a really quick rundown. But our bodies were not designed for chronic stress. As human beings, we weren't designed for that. They were designed for short-term, acute, quick stress to aid us to protect ourselves. So many of you have probably heard of the fight or flight reaction that we have and that animals have. And it's a beautiful way that we are designed, where if a lion is coming through my door, absolutely, I need that fight or flight system to get activated, right? I need my heart to be pumping faster, and I need that blood to be going to these major muscle groups so I can fight or run away really fast. I need my breathing to change because it is what could truly keep me safe in a life or death situation. And it's a beautiful design. But what happens is our body, as sophisticated as they are, when we feel stress, whether that's from a work deadline or our kids' school or managing all this pandemic, our body physically reacts to it the same way, even though it's not a fight or flight reaction every day. And we're not designed for that chronic stress. And so when we only want that alarm going off when we really need it to, that fight or flight kind of system, we can do things to make sure it doesn't get so escalated when we're dealing with the day-to-day stress of our daily life. Okay. But with that being said, with this pandemic, ways that we maybe used to relieve stress, like maybe sleeping or maybe going to a gym, might be a little bit more limited right now with maybe less time, or if our gyms aren't open. And so then our worries are ruminating in our minds and our bodies are physically activated by this stress. And so when our brain is stressed and it has one priority, to fight or flight, we get that physiological response. And so what we actually want to do is calm our body down. And this is a fantastic skill to teach for your children as well. But a really effective way to do this is through breathing. And so on the screen, I actually have just a square where it says breathe in, hold breath, breathe out, and pause. Some people call it square breathing, box breathing to try to remember it. But when we have that fight or flight reaction going and we're hyperventilating, or our hands are clammy, or our heart's racing, one way to kind of reset that body is to actually just engage in very calm, slow breathing, which then kind of overrides that, our body's physiological reaction, and it signals to our brain, hey, it's time to relax. So then our parasympathetic nerves become more active and our bodies begin to calm down. And so one way to do that is just to breathe, but to breathe very calmly and very slowly and for a long period of time. So I would say anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. And what you want to do is breathe in for a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, breathe out for a count of 4, and then pause. And you want to keep going through that kind of quote unquote box of breathing, where you breathe in slowly, you hold it, you breathe out, and you pause. And we're doing this, we're actually training our bodies to relax. And we do it with our kids. We can help them train their bodies to relax. So I actually, the way I do it, if you have small children, I don't know the ages of your children. My one who's rather young, I have her and she's blowing the biggest bubble she can. So I tell her to take in a very slow, long breath and hold it for a second, and then to blow it out and try to make the biggest bubble she can, fake bubble, of course, just to focus on breathing out. And this is a great skill that not only helps us as parents, but can help our children really alleviate some of the stress. Another way is through mindfulness. So, mindfulness is another helpful tool that is essentially just being present in the here and now. And it's incredibly effective for building resiliency and building almost our immunity to that physiological reaction to that stress. And so if we're finding it hard to focus, a really helpful, quick, mindful skill that you can do is focused on our 5 senses. And so briefly, instead of going through it step by step, I just want to say, just remember it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we can always come back to it when we're chatting if someone wants more explanation on this. But it's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're just focusing on your 5 senses. And so you focus on what are 5 things you can see? What are 4 things you can feel? What are 3 things you can hear? What are 2 things you can smell? And what is 1 thing you can taste? And all this is doing is when our anxieties are going to the future, or we're worrying about school, or we're worrying about the pandemic, it helps bring our thoughts back to the present, and it really grounds us in the present. And then we're much more suitable for making these more logical, rational decisions and behaviors rather than making them based on anxiety. And it's also important to do this with your kids, and it doesn't have to be the full 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It can be you're out on a walk with your children and you think about, what are 3 things you see right now? What are 2 things you're hearing? What are 5 things you're smelling on our walk? Or before bedtime, if you notice your kids are having a hard time winding down and falling asleep, it can be really helpful to think, what are 3 things you feel right now in your bed? What are 2 things you hear? What's 1 thing you smell or taste? And so just really focusing back on those senses can be so incredible for resiliency, not just for us, but also for our kids. And same with that breathing. It can be a really, really helpful thing to incorporate into our daily routine of just reminding ourselves, breathe. My Apple Watch goes off and tells me to breathe. And it's actually a really helpful reminder of just sometimes we need to calm down and breathe. And it sounds simple because we breathe every day. But if we actually proactively set time aside to breathe very slowly and calmly, we actually can reset that nervous system, even if we don't notice it getting kind of elevated throughout the day. Okay, so that's something that can be really helpful as you build into your routine. And that's a really important thing to do right now as parents, particularly during a pandemic, is finding a new routine. Even if you don't have kids, finding a new routine in this pandemic is incredibly helpful because we are creatures of habit. We're used to a schedule, we're used to routine. Our kids are used to that schedule and routine with certainty. And nearly overnight, it was kind of very much disrupted. And so it's more important than ever right now during this pandemic and as it continues to maintain this routine, including bedtime, which is a really important one for our kids and for us. but it creates a sense of order to the day for us, for our children particularly. It gives some reassurance and certainty during this very uncertain time for them. And so all children, including teenagers, however they are, can greatly impact from a routine. It can make them feel, more secure, and to our advantage, make them actually better behaved. So creating a flexible routine is going to be really helpful. And I know that sounds almost like an oxymoron where I'm saying, well, let's create a routine, but let's also be flexible. But with that, I really mean make a routine, not a schedule. So when we schedule every minute of our family day, it gets overwhelming, and it also can get thrown off by one simple phone call or one simple glitch on a virtual meeting with the teacher. And so sometimes if we schedule far too much into our day, one thing gets thrown off, we might just throw in the towel. It's kind of this all or none thinking pattern that a lot of us get into of, well, my whole day is thrown off, so why even do it? So I don't mean set a really strict schedule for yourself, but what I mean by routine is, maybe chunks of your day, maybe getting up the same time every day, just like you would if you were going into the office, and showering and eating breakfast and getting set up. My daughter right now, she is on a half the time she's in school, half the time she's at home virtually. And so on her off days, we stick with her school routine, and I have to plan my clients around that. And so it does take some proactive planning for this routine, but I want to make sure that she gets up the same time every day, eats breakfast, is dressed as if she was getting out the door for school, has lunch the same time, around the same time that she would at school. And so I kind of plan my schedule around that, and I'm grateful I have that flexibility to do that. But trying to find a balance between your work needs, but also their needs in regard to their routine, to keep them as consistent as possible, their meal times as consistent as possible, getting active as much as possible within your routine. And so creating this flexible but really consistent routine creates certainty and structure that really our kids thrive off of. And a lot of us do as well as adults. Again, it gives a sense of purpose in our day and value in our day. It's important to maintain them even on our days off, okay? But I encourage you, really get your kids involved, right? Let your family come up with this routine in general to make sure you're meeting everyone's basic needs within that routine that they need. And then within that routine, learning, okay, how can we build in some social time, right? One of the slides in the video talked about how we're really not alone, right? Sometimes it might feel that way because of social distancing. So looking at how can we stay social, while physically distancing. Maybe that is a walk with someone who is more than 6 feet apart, or maybe that is using technology and having a Zoom trivia night. But looking at how can we plan to stay social within our physical distance, okay? Also planning to be active. Activity greatly enhances our mood. It reduces our stress. Get outside if you can. Get outside with your kids. Find activity you guys all enjoy doing, and making that part of your routine. Also finding joy, okay? So finding joy and adding that into your day. Doing something that truly brings you joy. And sometimes when I say that, this could be just my own thoughts, but it almost sounds like I'm being kind of like hokey pokey. Just find joy and you're going to feel good. But really and truly, there's science behind it. Okay, there is research backing it up that joy truly lifts our mood. It truly sparks creativity. So doing something that brings joy every day and planning on doing that is incredibly powerful during this completely uncertain time. Maybe it's a favorite snack, or, having a dance party with your child to their favorite song, sending a card to someone that you're grateful for. But finding joy in these everyday moments, even amidst this chaos, is incredibly helpful. And so some of the research that's backed this up. This is a short example, but there were 2 sets of physicians that were handed a file, and these patients, fake patients, had same symptoms of both files. Both groups of the practicing physicians, same files, same symptoms, and they're both asked to come up with the best diagnosis and treatment plan for this quote-unquote patient. The only difference was one group of those practicing physicians got a piece of chocolate. I love chocolate, it brings me complete joy, but that was the only difference. And the group that had the chocolate had more creativity, got the diagnoses more accurate, and the treatment plan more accurate. And it's a very simple example, but it shows that there is truly a little bit of science behind truly finding joy every day. Also in your routine, making sleep a priority for you and your children. Making that part of your daily routine, having a set bedtime, a set waking time. That's really, really imperative right now, not just for our physical health, but our emotional health, our routines, that consistency. It almost goes back to when we're little and, we do book, brush, bed before bedtime. Same thing, having that nighttime routine before bed can be really, really powerful. It can greatly enhance kind of how we function as a parent during this time and how our kids function during this time. And lastly, one of the biggest thing I think is really helpful to think of is that we truly are models for our kids. And so it's a beautiful time that we are now with them more, that we can model the behaviors we want to see. I remember when my oldest went off to kindergarten, one of the hardest parts I had was knowing that suddenly this other adult was going to get to model how to manage feelings and was going to get to model how to react and how to talk to people and how she would talk to my daughter. And I can remember that's what I was anxious about, not whether or not she could read or write her name. And now this time kind of given to us is we can model that now. We can be that model that we want our children to see. So we can model how to manage feelings, talking through how you're managing your feelings. I'm worried about grandma, so I'm going to give her a call, or I'm going to send a letter. We're a model for our child's behavior. And so if we practice the behaviors we want them to see, even in regards to the pandemic, such as, safe distancing and hygiene, using compassion to treat other people and talk about other people, our children and our teenagers are going to learn that from us. And what a beautiful time to be able to have control over what they do actually see when they're maybe with us more than they are with their peers, which is not always common for kids. And so how we talk and how we behave in front of them is a huge influence. Promoting kindness and compassion, social media and screen time. This is a huge concern for parents. But we now can actually model setting limits. If they want to have a conversation with us, putting our phone down during dinner, putting our phone away and not checking our emails, demonstrating how to have conversations in person and not just via Snapchat or text messages, engaging in healthy activities outside of the screens and putting the screen time down for that. It's a beautiful time for us to actually help them learn that balance with screen time. Okay. But again, a lot of this pandemic has really bred some anxiety and fear with us. But again, if we look at kind of how we can make the most out of this time that we do now have with our children that maybe we didn't have before, it's really focusing on our thoughts and our behaviors and how we can then also be a model for our children. And that is the end of my slides, Bambi. Oh, and I think, Bambi, I think you might be talking, but I can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh, I was
There
muted.
you go.
Sorry about that. So I want to jump in because I know that there are a number of folks here who are already pretty resilient. So again, many of them are entrepreneurs, so they tend to be inclined to be extremely optimistic and grounded. So for me, what I love to hear is just their stories of, and following your slides, sort of follow and hear their stories of challenges, but also how they're finding resilience and how they're being grounded and how they're becoming role models for their kids. So I'm just gonna go ahead and I've asked a couple if I could select them. So I'm gonna ask Maria to share, maybe because she's got the youngest, I believe she might have the youngest children here, because I see it, we have them all across the board. We have children, we have babies, toddlers, elementary to, it looks like we even have some in college, and then the teenage years, and they all have, having an 8 to 9-year-old 19-year-old, I've experienced a lot of that. So let's start with the babies, and especially for a working mom. Maria, do you want to share parenting during a pandemic?
Sure. So I have a 3.5-year-old and a 3-month-old. So he was just born in mid-May. And my story is that I'm a CEO. I run a company called Thinks, and I was based in New York City. And in mid-March, I realized that COVID was going to take off. So I packed up in a night and took my cat and my 3-year-old and my pregnant stomach and drove across the country. And I ended up in California, which is where my parents are, as well as my brothers. And I did that one because I wanted to get out of the hospital system in New York, but also I'm a single mom and realized I was going to have my family around in order to help care for my kids. And it's been a wild ride. I think I'm actually incredibly grateful. And that's because like I've been missing California for so long, and I almost feel guilty for being grateful because I'm now in California where I wanted to be for a long period of time. I am spending a ton of time with my 72-year-old parents, and they're spending a ton of time with my kids. And they have this special relationship that they never would have had otherwise. And you know, I'm able to spend a ton of time with my kids too. So there's certainly the frustrations, and I think my frustrations have lied in I know I need childcare. So I'm now in the Sierras of California, so a few hours away from my parents. In order to have more space, I had a live-in that I had for 3 weeks, and I ultimately fired her actually on Sunday because she did some inappropriate stuff with my young girl. So now I'm running a company with 0 childcare, and of course I have frustrations and anxiety about being able to do this all, right? Luckily my company is doing incredibly well, so I kind of feel like you know, perhaps being more thoughtful and being happier maybe is enabling the success of the company to some extent as well. And then I think the other thing I've really struggled with is the sense of guilt around stability. So my daughter does say all the time, I want to go back to New York. I want to be with my friends. I want to have my room again. And so, you know, I do have the guilt of feeling like I've put her in a situation that obviously is long-term and more stable, but she doesn't know that. And is that going to upset her to some extent and have a long-term impact? So, you know, the typical things that you worry about, I think as a parent, that you're not doing things completely right. But I think overall, I would never not have this happen again. Like, I mean, not COVID per se, but I love the experience that I've been able to have with my children and with my family, my more extended family. And I'm so grateful, especially that my parents are able to spend so much time with my children. And I will never be able to, you know, I will never regret that because it's something that is, you know, more important than anything else.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think mom guilt kind of comes along for the ride, regardless of how healthy of thinkers we are. I think that's actually part of what makes you such an awesome mom is, you know, you find the support, you drove across the country to find the support you needed, you know, you focus on being grateful, which what an incredible opportunity for you and your family, your entire family. But some of that guilt, you know, shows that you're still, even through all these positive aspects, you're still keeping the best of your mind. You know, how do we still make the best for her? You know, if she misses her room, you know, at least you're empathetic towards that. You know, guilt in and of itself is not always a bad thing. It shows that you're empathetic. It shows that, you know, even with all these wonderful things that you see, because you're so much more mature than she is, she doesn't see that yet. And so you have that empathy for her. And that can actually help drive you to look at, okay, if she misses her room, what can I do here to make it special for her, you know? Or if she misses this aspect, how can we make it even better here or do something different for her here? So I don't think that guilt is necessarily a bad thing. I think that kind of comes along for the ride, and you're just a very empathetic mom. But I mean, what a rock star, right? To take this hand of cards, you know, thrown at you and say, well, I'm going to go across country and have the support I need and find gratitude. That's incredibly powerful. Incredibly inspiring. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Always been in my bucket list, driving across country.
Right.
A colleague
Pandemic.
who walked across the country, literally walked across the country. It took him 10 months. He did a little bit of hitchhiking, but so that's quite an adventure. But I was I was thinking about, you know, on the plane when they tell you that you have to put on your mask before you put it on your child. So you always have to take care of yourself before you can ever take care of anyone around you. And that's sort of what I was saying in the beginning, is sort of that inward taking care of yourself. And I think, Hillary, you're structuring our talks this way, right? The session is about, you know, how do we take care of ourselves as parents first? And I also think for kids, it's good for them to travel around. My younger sister, has moved around 5 times. Her child is 8 years old and he's lived in 5 places. But I heard that kids who've traveled around are actually more creative. Speaking for myself, I've actually never lived in a place more than 4 years growing up. And I turned out okay. I'm not great, but okay. I turned out okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
So I'm going to go up in age. So I see Sharon, who's also, Sharon, if you want to share, your children are a little bit older, but you also have 2.
Yeah, hi everyone. I adopted a couple girls when they were 3 and 5, and I was 50. So I started this journey pretty late in life. And we moved from Marin, California to Southern California 4 years ago. And I started an office down here for the firm I was working for. And that went pretty well for a while, but I was working nights and weekends, and I felt like as a single mother, I wasn't really giving enough to the kids. So about a year ago, I decided to make a change and just took on projects. Well, sure enough, that year turned into, I fell, broke my arm, had to have surgery. There was a couple months taken out there, and then COVID hit. So it's been a completely different life than what I've been accustomed to before this point. But I'm incredibly grateful that my 2 kids now are in 5th and 7th grade, and they're in this time of learning social. They're very keenly aware of their social standings and interactions, and I don't think I would have known how much their friends were influencing them and guiding them if I hadn't been home. So I got lucky just because of the work situation and the time that we're together. That being said, I'm a little bored. I don't have what I used to have. And so I'm just opening up to new opportunities, and the kids are watching me do that, which is funny because they're used to hearing a lot of client calls, and they're used to hearing me say I've got meetings here and there, and they've become very accustomed to me being 100% here for them now. I don't know what's going to happen when I have to go back. But our COVID experience has been a good one. It really has. So I'm thankful for that.
That's amazing. And you said you started late. I would probably say you started wiser. Probably a lot more wisdom than anyone that started younger. You mentioned that you didn't realize how much your peers were influencing them. Do you mean in a negative way or positive way?
Both,
or both?
Both. They're just, I think up until 4th grade, their friendships were really play friendships, playground friendships. And when they hit 11, 12, they started wanting more approval from their friends. And they started grouping off. So there'd be certain groups that would eliminate one friend, and that was painful. And then they would, when they went to middle school, they formed other, smaller groups, and other people were left out. And there's just a lot of management in how they feel about themselves and how they feel about their friends, that, kindness and compassion can be easily overlooked in those situations when you don't have the social skills. So
right.
I certainly am not the perfect person on that front, but I certainly want them to at least have that input that they,
Absolutely.
These people who are a little awkward right now, are going to grow into pretty amazing people, and you don't want to lose their friendships just because maybe they talk too much or they're too loud or they're too this or they're too that. Anyways, it's fun. It's a full-time job for sure, but
yes, and then some.
Yeah.
But I think that's incredibly powerful. Realizing you don't know how much their peers are influencing them. They influence them throughout their entire life, right? And that's important. It's important for them to have those connections with their peers. But again, kind of going back to that, what are we doing with this time given to us? It sounds like you are trying, even though none of us are perfect at it, to model that kindness, to model that compassion, so that maybe they wouldn't have been seeing that from their peers, but at least during this time when you do have that availability to be with them, they see it from you, right? And you're right, they're going to grow up and they might not agree with your kindness and compassion maybe right now anyway, but they're going to at least see it and kind of store it back there. And just so that's when I talk about, being models for our kids, it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. Is their peers are so influential, and during this break when they don't have maybe as much influence from their peers, what a beautiful job at being bored and figuring out what to do with them and showing them kindness and compassion. That's incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to say a couple things for anybody on this call. Please jump in if you want to comment on, say, what Maria said or what Sharon said, because I think it's really helpful to hear from everyone. So don't feel like you have to wait for Hillary or myself to call on you. So if you have a comment on what they say, or particularly for parents who have older children, and if you have some advice, that's also great. But I did want to say, when Sharon said she was bored, I did, Groundhog Day came, I thought of that, and it definitely feels like Groundhog Day to me. I was even speaking to Hillary. I was talking to a friend of mine who is still single and is traveling around and enjoying life, flying planes, surfing, and doing all these things. And I'm thinking, my life seems really boring. I'm just home all the time because I have my kids. But then I hear the two of you, Maria and Sharon, and you're both so grateful. And that's what I try to ground myself in as well, is this gratefulness for this time that I have with them, so I can be their role models. Because I'm pretty sure if Maria would be in her office right now in New York City working and all dressed up and and missing that time to be the role model. And look, it's not going to be like this forever, but that's what I'm hearing from the two of you, so that's really helpful. I see. All right. So if anybody wants to comment on those two stories, or I'm going to just pick somebody else to share. And I'm going to pick a man right here, Bernard.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm well. So
Good.
How old is your child?
She is 2.5 on the 18th.
That's great.
So yeah, and I'm enjoying even with all the craziness, I'm enjoying every aspect of being a dad. I never actually thought I'd be a dad, so this has been such a blessing.
So what have been your challenges, and how are you finding resilience, and how are you being a role model?
Well, so one, we've got daycare still available here. So she spends 3 days in daycare, and Jamie has off the other 2 days that she's not in daycare, and during the weekends. So we've been able to work around each other's schedules and stuff like that. I still work full time. I sell cars, so I've still been at the job location and everything like that. And then when I come home, I spend as much time with them as I can, and just being really present when I do that.
How are you able to find yourself staying present when working full time and then coming home to a 2.5-year-old? Because that can be a challenge sometimes as parents, to really be present when we are exhausted after a day of work.
Great question. Great question. Actually, one of the things is I was listening to you talking and a lot of the other people talking. I realized that they're picking up a lot of awesome strategies or things that they can use to improve their life, like the gratitude and just trying to be mindful. What I realized is in the past 13 years, I've actually spent the last 13 years of my life really just improving in every aspect of it. And the best way that I could honestly say I did that was from reading, just lots and lots of reading. Because I used to be the type of guy that had so many conversations in my own head. You know what I mean? And they never went well. They were just so many more problems and then compiled problems of things that never even happened. And so instead of doing that, I started really getting into Audible, which has been a life changer for me, because instead of my head going into all these things, I'm filling it with a lot of awesome information from things that people have done that have improved their lives. And I get to utilize bits and pieces that really take that into myself. And it's improved my life in like every facet. So a lot of the different techniques that I use in being present is the gratitude technique. Tony Robbins talks about the 3-minute stuff that he does, where he talks about the first 3 minutes that he spends is literally what he's so grateful for. And then he breathes all that in. There's just so many different things, but taking all that stuff in, it makes it really easy to come home. And even if she is a screaming 2.5-year-old, I get to do all the bedtimes with her. And some nights, she's the most cuddly, sweet little girl in the world. And then other nights she's screaming her head off, bloody murder, where it's like, I don't even know what to do at this point. Like, for example, the last, this happened last week, and it really made me and my wife reflect on it. Whenever she does fussing, right? We don't yell at her. We don't, you know what I mean? We really try to love her as much. And so we play these little games where we're like, hey, you know what? You want to fuss? There's the other room. You can fuss as loud as you want in there. And then when you're ready to come back, we'll be here ready for you. And she's done it where she goes in the other room and we'll play with her even. She'll scream as loud as she can. And we'll be like, is that all you got? Well, you're over there. Go ahead. Let me hear your best fuss. And she'll be like, ah. And she'll be like, she actually invented the one where she does it in a pillow now. So she's like, so because we would tell her, instead of, like getting mad whenever she screams, we'd be like, oh, that hurts daddy's ears. That hurts mommy's ears. So then she started inventing this thing where she stuffs her face in a pillow and screams into it. And then she'll put her head up and is that better? And we're just like, how did you even come up with that? That's amazing. But so then the thing is, though, we discovered something that happened where, and it really kind of scared me at first, because like she tries to limit her fussing, and I really don't want to suppress anything in her growth. You know what I mean? I want to give her as much freedom while obviously creating healthy boundaries, but I want to give her as much freedom to be creative, to be expressive, and then just be a great support. But the other night she was having a hard time really going to bed, and she just started fussing like crazy, and she was just screaming and just going all insane. And I'm trying my best to hold her, and I'm trying my best to, comfort her. But there was nothing. And it didn't make sense what it was. That we had no rhyme or reason. There really wasn't anything going on. And then out of nowhere, she starts laughing hysterically. And she's like, Araya, no crying no more, no fussing. And she's like, still got tears in her eyes. And it was really weird, because I was just like, oh my gosh, what if we are suppressing her from being able to fuss because we try to tell her not to, or that it bothers us? Because all of a sudden she started seeming like, I'm not allowed to fuss in front of my parents or anything like that. And obviously I don't want her to be going crazy all the time and stuff like that, but I don't also want to suppress her from being able to be her. So me and my wife were really sitting down and thinking about what we can do, and hopefully find something in some of these books, like I said, that we've been reading, that can help us with understanding that. We were going to enroll her into Montessori school, but then obviously COVID happened. So she's still at her daycare. They're phenomenal there. They're very communicative. And they even helped us with her whole potty training, and she got it down like that. But other than that, I don't know. It's been really, really amazing going through the transitions of all of these books that we learned, because both me and my wife do it. And we get to interact with all the skills that we've learned. We also have done marriage counseling and stuff like that throughout our relationship, to be able to find new strategies or techniques to be able to communicate when we actually reach an impasse. We've realized that, look, we can't do this on our own. And with as much as help from counselors, from books and stuff like that, it has actually reshaped the trajectory of our lives. And everything has just been amazing, even during this time. we've been able to be there for each other through this time. Like, it's just been awesome.
That is great.
That's about it.
That's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. You know, what I hear you saying so much is, one, you're trying to help, right? You want to take in all this information as a parent, you know, as a partner, and you want to grow, right? And I
Right.
think what was so powerful is you're letting her feel, right? I hear you saying, I don't want to suppress that, right? You say, it's okay, go in the other room. You can fuss. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. And then you showed that unconditional love when she comes back, right? That regardless of what you do, even if you're yelling, I'm going to love you. But what I've also heard in your journey, right, is that you found all these powerful tools that have helped you, you know, reading, listening to Audible, doing breathing, finding gratitude, you know, and now, you know, when she's young and home, it's a super helpful time and kind of a really opportunistic time to say, you seem to be feeling really sad. You know, you seem to be feeling really angry or really frustrated. This is what I do sometimes when I'm frustrated, right? She learned, which is incredibly, you know, creative there. Okay, if they don't like me yelling, I'm still going to yell into a pillow, right? Which shows she's trying, right? She is trying to release that emotion, but in a way that's acceptable, right? And that's really what we
Right.
want. We want our kids to feel. We want our kids to know that whatever emotion they feel is okay, particularly during now when things are all over the place, but help them learn what are healthy ways to express it, right? Because when she goes into 5th grade or 7th grade, if she starts screaming at the teacher, right, there are repercussions for that.
Right.
But it's okay to be angry. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to be anxious. But here's some helpful ways to do it, right? And you've shown that you have some beautiful ways reading, right? Read to her. You can read to her books on, you know, feelings and anxiety and anger and tantrums, you know, breathing, you know, blowing bubbles. You have shown that when you find ways to work through that, it works. And I see you so much doing that with her, you know, letting her feel, which is huge, because so many times as parents, we just want them to stop. And
Right.
what we might be doing is suppressing that emotion, right? And
Mhm.
not letting them know it's okay to feel that. When what I hear you saying, which is huge, is you don't do that. So I really commend you for that, you know, to letting her feel and showing her we still love you, even if you yell, but maybe let's work together to find a healthier way to
Right.
release.
And we actually do that. She's a very communicative. Her vocabulary skills are pretty advanced actually for her age. So she actually talks about it. And the funniest thing is she definitely knows that she has me wrapped around her finger, right? As opposed to mom. Like, she definitely has it, because she'll walk up to me and just like down to the side of my leg, hug my leg, look up at me and go, "Oh, very sad." And if she knows she's just gonna get like all the attention from me, it's so stinking cute, but it's so funny. Cause yeah, she has me wrapped around her finger. But we definitely have a lot of different techniques that she can utilize. And some days she's phenomenal at them. And then some days obviously she doesn't want to use them. And I've heard that happens, right? I'm the
Yeah.
same way. I have good techniques, and some days I'm not in the mood to use them. And I'll do less than optimal. I'll make less than optimal decisions. Hopefully I'll replace those in the future, but you know what I mean? So I totally get it. And it's just fun watching her grow. And one of the biggest reasons why I definitely didn't want to suppress her was because for a long time, that's how I was raised. You know, my mom was very, you know, you can't do this, can't do that. And honestly, those were the things that I ended up wanting to do, period, because it hindered my freedom. And I realized that I could just be more creative with her and give her a lot more other opportunities, or a lot of different creative outlets. Like, if I don't want her spilling water all over the thing, I'll give her 3 different jars, and I'll show her pouring them into the other jars. Next thing you know, she's like trying to master it without spilling a single drop, as opposed to, no, stop spilling things. And it works. I mean, it really does. Because if I tried the no, stop spilling things, it's going to get thrown at me.
Well,
Which
and
is
she
probably
wouldn't
what I
learn
would do
how to
too.
do it. She wouldn't learn how to stop spilling, right? And that's
Right.
what I hear you saying is you want her to learn, right? Through these experiences. It's not always about punishment, don't make a mess. She's only been in this world 2.5 years, right?
Right.
There's a lot to learn. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's actually impressive at it, because now she's like, and then she'll wipe it. She'll sometimes go crazy if she's and I'm like, it's just a spill. It's okay. It's so funny though. I wish she was here right now so I could introduce you guys to her. She's hilarious. but
I'm
she's
getting
out with
the sense
mom.
that it's not Groundhog Day in your family,
Mm-mm,
Bernard, not with you and your child. So
mm-mm.
sounds like she's like a bundle of joy and surprises all the time.
Yeah.
Maria, your daughter is similar age. I think they're the similar age to Bernard's, maybe 1 year older. And how do you remain grateful, especially when you have so much to do? And I'm sure she's not always an angel. I'm sure she's an angel, but not always an angel.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the last 6 months, she's definitely become much more opinionated and feisty. She's always been super confident, but she just like the talking back has started. I think she runs the house, similar to what you just described. And sometimes I think it has to do with, her just being her, because she's always been a little bit, I would say, more confident than a lot of the other girls, or at least I've been around. And then I think secondly, it's been a bit of not as much of a structure, as you described, Hillary. It's been more flexible in terms of our routine. And she did love that she was on a calendar. She had daycare, she was dropped off at the same time, she had lunch at the same time, she had her regular routine with her friends. And she doesn't have that anymore, right? So sometimes I blame it on that as well. I think I'm okay with dealing with it, in terms of I just try to distract her and move her to something else. So far I haven't gotten a huge amount of anxiety, unless it happens on a call that's like, something that's really important. And that's been the challenge for me, because I've had such trouble with childcare, is that sometimes I've literally been on board calls where I have to have both kids, and I'm trying to like mute myself, when they start to scream, but I'm having to present all the time, right? So that's been challenging. I think sometimes I lose it a bit, right? And I have become more stern than I probably would otherwise. And then of course that ends up being the sense of guilt and feeling like, this is not the parent I want to be. So I think it's just, for me, it's trying to check myself around that. And I have done what you, Hillary, described. I thought that was I started doing it just a few months ago around dinner time. I always ask, like, what are you grateful for? What are the things that have frustrated you as well? Because I think it's not only good to talk about the good, but also the bad, and like be able to talk about those feelings. And it's okay to feel angry, and it's okay to feel frustrated, and why, and those type of things. So I don't, believe me, I have lots to learn, and I've been taking notes furiously as you've been talking. But so far, I think my gratefulness has outweighed the anxiety. And I also am extremely lucky being at a woman-owned company and very backed by, a board that's very oriented towards women, and being able to balance it all, that everyone's kind of been okay, with my having constant interruptions, and not feeling like I'm going to be, kind of not having a board or shareholders that are thinking that that's going to negatively impact the business performance or my performance.
Sure. It just shows that you're able to balance both of it. And absolutely, I think that's spot on, talking at dinner about not just what we're grateful for, but, what else happened during your day that even wasn't good. Sometimes people do something called sweet sour service, just as a way to remember it. What's something sweet that happened today? What was something good about your day? What's something that you enjoyed? What was something sour? What was something that you didn't like, or something that happened to you that was mean? And then what's something you did that was a service? What's something you did for someone else? And for little kids, that can be, I picked up the dog toys, right? Or I picked up the towel that I dropped on the ground. But looking at what else do we do for others? And then my oldest daughter, actually, so we used to always do sweet sour service. She started saying, well, I want to add another S, and I want to say silly. What's one thing I did that was silly today as well? And I was like, what a powerful reminder where, yeah, there's going to be good things that happen to us. There's going to be bad things that happen to us, but we also need to have joy and have fun and be silly. So we started adding silly to the sweet sour service as well. But I think that's spot on, Maria, where, not just saying great, what are we grateful for, but what were some things you didn't like? Because not only does it teach our kids to express their emotions and express their thoughts and their feelings about the day, but it also gives us insight to grow and to improve on the next day. You know, speaking of, you know, if you're meeting with a board and your kids are screaming, we might not have been totally happy with our reaction during the time, even though we might have been doing the best we can. I think as parents, particularly if you're on this call, we're obviously trying to do the best we can. And I truly think any parent on here is doing the best they can, but we're able to gain insight from that. So it's not a complete wash. You know, if we feel that guilt of, man, I really lost it on my kids during that call. Well, okay, let's grow from it then, right? I realize I still have grace and I haven't gotten booted yet, and it hasn't affected my performance yet, and people seem pretty understanding. And so we have that thought process going into it of, even if they start screaming, there's hopefully going to be a little bit of grace here, and I'm just going to have to mute myself if I can, right? And then looking at, okay, why were they screaming, right? Did they need attention? Obviously, a baby is a different story, right? But if they're 3.5, you know, do they need attention? And how can I maybe proactively counter that? You know, can I give them devoted attention right before the call if you know it's going to happen? You know, or can we make plans to do something afterwards, their favorite activity? And so not just having it a complete wash and just beating ourselves over guilt, but using that guilt as insight to kind of push us forward, and learn how we'd rather do it the next time around.
I have a comment on that, but I wanted to ask Maria something really quickly. I think you guys saw my son behind me, and I have gotten used to having him just make these cameo appearances. So I'm wondering, have you gotten used, is it okay now for a CEO to just sit there with their child and have because I'm doing it, they're not necessarily, you know, always board meetings, and I know some meetings are serious, but do you feel comfortable, you know, having your kids like sit around with you? And they're a little younger, so it's hard for you to really, you know, keep them quiet. But what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I struggled with that at the very beginning. Like I remember it being like March 1st or something, and I was really sick in February. Hopefully not COVID. I still don't have the antibody test, but hopefully it was actually, since it went away. But I ended up pulling my daughter out of school pretty early, like mid-February, because of that, and I was just worried about her being sick as well. And I was on the phone with our largest strategic investor, and they had so Kimberly Clark put some money in September, and so I was talking to the CEO actually, and she jumped in completely naked in the background, and I was like, oh boy, like she had taken off all of her clothes. I thought, oh, this is going to be a real test as to like how they're going to think about kids this long. I thought this might be headed in the direction. And he was so cool. He was like, oh my gosh, my kids are back there too, and they constantly threaten to do that. Like, I don't know if he was totally lying, but it was a great kind of breaking down those barriers, right? And I felt so much more comfortable. And to be honest, it improved my relationship with him, because you could be like real. And every time now we talk, we could like share stories about all the craziness of work from home, and because now everyone's doing it. So I actually feel, I mean, that's just one example, but I think that is true for almost everyone I've interacted with within my kind of shareholder base. The only exception is that I have one board member who is he's a lot older, and he's in Israel, and, you know, he has lots of help and everything else. So I think he kind of feels like, you know, somebody like me should have that as well. And so that's been a little bit more challenging, but I think, you know, the reality is if the business wasn't performing well, I'd probably be a little bit more concerned about it, just to state the obvious. But because it is, I'm like, well, you know, they'll just have to get used to it, even him. So that's kind of my view on it.
Sounds like you've found a way to actually use that as a positive, right? And actually find a connection that maybe you wouldn't have had before. You know, even though we all have different walks of life, except for the person from Israel, it sounds like you're actually all connecting in a way that you wouldn't have connected otherwise. Because we are human, right? And there's so many more layers to us than just our job. And so it sounds like it's been helpful as a way to really break down some of those barriers and really connect more, which can be beneficial from a business side.
I mean, I think everyone who has kids is going through the same exact thing globally, right? So in many ways, I think it brings you closer together because you can share these stories rather than not. So I guess my learning is like not hiding it and being completely upfront about the challenges has overall been a positive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they share that BBC interview. Do you remember that one from 2 or 3 years ago when they just say how different it is these days? Because in that interview, he was just so upset because his child was in the room, and now everyone's like, okay, yep, that's my son. Or at least I do that. I've gotten so used to, I just can't fight it anymore. We had one of these sessions and my son was literally in between this going, blueberry, do you want blueberries? And I was, what are you asking me? I don't know if you guys heard that, but anyway, so I've gotten used to it. So I wanted to touch on, you said the thought catalog, that was Hillary's thought catalog and what you're doing with your kids. So when March, when we shut down and we sheltered in place, I thought I was going to be super mom and I was going to keep my kids purposeful and grateful. And so every, dinner at 5 o'clock, I would start making dinner and our kids would be at dinner because they had no place else to be. And I had a gratitude book. So they'd have to share one thing they're grateful for and one thing they accomplished. And that lasted for all of about 3 months. And then it opened up and, now they're doing all sorts of things. And I have one son who's, ended up living in a tent in my backyard. So I'm having a lot of challenges here. And my kids are a little bit older, and so they tend to challenge you even more for the parents here who have older kids. So I wanted to bring some of them in. I don't know if they wanted to share some of their wisdom about parenting, but I'd love to bring either Tammy or Dawn, whoever feels like they want to share. And just talk about some of Tammy, maybe you could start because you have 6 kids and you're just super mom as well. So.
All right. So with that whole super mom preface, right, Bambi, I will start off with saying that, I yelled, I'm guilty of feeling like a failure. I've struggled with depression. I put myself in mommy timeout. My kids all know that. When they were really little. Right now they're 18, 17, 15, 14, 11, and 9. They're all 1.5 to 2 years apart. 5 girls, 1 boy. And when they were really little, I knew I just needed some time to myself because I actually homeschooled before homeschooling was a thing for the entire planet. And so I had to figure this out. And these kids, they just needed me constantly. I mean, you go to the bathroom, they're still there and you're just like, oh, I just need a moment. And I told them, I'm like, listen, guys, I just need 20 minutes and I'll be human again. Don't bother me unless there's fire or gushing blood. That's literally what I would tell them. And I'm a nurse. So, I mean, they would cut, if they had a little boo-boo, they'd like squeeze it out. I'm like, nope, gushing blood. So just leave me alone for 20 minutes and put on a movie, go upstairs, take an Epsom salt bath, do all that deep breathing that Hillary was talking about, spa music, candles, whatever it took to just kind of be human again, and then come back and be like, oh, okay, now I can be a good mom. So yeah, I've gone through all the spectrums of, having a 5-week newborn, being hospitalized for an unknown sickness, to, yes, I used my baby crib as the clean laundry hamper during survival months of working. I was full-time as an Army captain, nurse, in addition to homeschooling the kids and just doing everything. And now, let's see, the kids are older. I've gone through eye rolling, attitude. So one thing, Bambi, as you were talking about with the older kids, like when they have that attitude, and we know that gratitude is so important. And I thought when you said it went on for 3 months, I'm like, wow, that's really impressive. I thought 3 days would be really impressive, but 3 months, kudos to you, seriously. But I think probably one of the most important things for me with my kids when they would struggle with that attitude, it's just the service. So Hillary had mentioned sweet, sour, service, and silly, but getting my children involved with serving in the community or with other people or even with each other, right? So my children have grown up writing letters to each other when they were mean to each other, said something cruel, or stole somebody's toy. And I don't know if it's just my kids, but from my experience, most of them don't like to write letters, and I'd make them write like a full page so, of an apology. So it's painful, maybe physically and also mentally, but emotionally. But they read it out loud to each other, and then at the end, I make them give each other a hug. By then, they're laughing because they're just, the whole thing was silly anyway, because usually it is. But so serving each other, making the punishment fit the crime. So obviously, if someone messed up somebody's stuff, then they've got to clean, for a few days for that person. But I would get them involved in a community, whether it's in a soup kitchen, or I know it's a little bit difficult with COVID right now, but I serve at a pregnancy crisis center. So my oldest daughter, she's 18 now. During the summer, she was home, obviously, she wasn't in college. And she decided, she was like, Mom, I really want to go down there with you. And so I was like, okay, you can be a chaperone in the ultrasound room. I do ultrasound. And so I said, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to say anything. Just be a little quiet, fly on the wall. You're just physically there as a chaperone. And so just listening to other people's experiences and struggles, and seeing their seemingly impossible situations, and shedding light and hope, it just really just changed her, to see that her situation is not so bad. Another thing I did, I'm also a medical missionary. Bambi knows I'm studying right now to be a doctor. So my schedule's crazy trying to balance everything. But when my kids turn 16, I take them on a medical mission trip, and they get to pick where in the world they want to go with Mom. And my oldest did pick Africa, and my second one picked Vanuatu. Third one picked Vanuatu. I had to go find on the map. I didn't know where it was, a small chain of Polynesian islands. And the third one picked El Salvador. But these opportunities, again, just allowed them to just see from a different perspective. And it really did change who they were inside, and their attitude and their gratefulness. And speaking of gratitude journal, I mean, it just really changes who they are. And I know not everyone can take their child across the world to experience this, but you can do it even within your own neighborhood, inviting neighborhood kids over. There's just all kinds of different opportunities out there.
I know, Dawn, are you jumping off? I thought you said you have you're muted. If you want to say a couple things before you leave.
Sure. So sorry, I do have a call in literally now. So I'll just share that it was amazing to hear what each of you have volunteered to share with the group, but also your challenges, your perseverance. Thank you for being on here and leading us, Hillary. I'll say two words that I think every parent should remember: seasonal blessings. No matter what age your child is, they're always a blessing, and they're only in that season for a short while. So don't let it go by. Focus on the positive, and it will pass the challenging seasons, I promise. Sorry, I gotta go. Thank you.
I think Don is already a grandfather now, so you have to go through that whole thing again, because your daughter is in her 20s, right? So, and your grandchild, so you got relooping.
Yeah, next week I'll have a little more to say, okay? Or next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've got to run as well, but thank you so much for the time and the insight, and it was nice to meet all of you.
Thanks, Maria. Hopefully you'll join us in 2 weeks from now.
Yes, I will be doing that. Bye.
We can stay on just for 5 more minutes if anybody else wants to stay on, just to follow on Tammy's stories about dealing with teenagers. And the youngest one is how old?
She's 9.
Okay, 9. So she's, I have an 8-year-old, and your teenagers, that's an amazing experience that you're providing all of them. And I'm from the Philippines, so I always, wish that I could take my kids back and just show them how, how much they have here. Although this is going to sound terrible, we live next to Oakland, and so there's a lot of homelessness. So it's almost like we just have to go around Oakland in certain areas, and they could already see it. That sounds terrible. But I wanted to ask about your 9-year-old, because I'm in a situation where I have 4 children, and the 8-year-old wants to do everything that the older teenagers do. And and I was saying this to Hillary, does not want to go to bed because everybody else is up, and just feels like they're having everything taken away from them. So how do you deal with the youngest one who's constantly having to look at the older ones who get so much more freedom?
I touched on the bedtime routine thing just a little bit. So in general, we have our routine where, we read a book or do Bible and prayer together, and then everyone goes to their room. And as long as the teens are quiet with whatever they're doing, it helps the younger one feel like she can go to bed and go to sleep or whatever she needs to do. But yeah, it is a challenge. I can tell, like, she's got 4 older sisters that are all teenagers, and they're all into clothes and all that stuff. And so she's definitely jumped on that bandwagon a lot sooner than the other girls when they were her age. But so far, it hasn't been a bad thing. So I would be curious to what questions or what specifically you have, Bambi.
Well, I think it's, I've gotten him tamed now to go to bed. This was sort of happening maybe 10 days ago when we were transitioning to school. So he was just having a tough time going to bed at 8:30 when his older brothers were up, and I have a high schooler now, and so we allow him to stay up. We also allow him to have his phone. And so he wants to also have that time. He wants to also have those many video game times, and he wants to hang out with his older brother all the time and his friends. And that's kind of the stuff. And it's a gap, 8 and 14. And so he just and sometimes, their personality, they don't understand how to be adults or older or even teenagers. So they'll say things they think are cool, and it's not so cool. And so it's just wanting to be like the big brothers, and wanting to be able to go out and do everything like them. We sort of have it under control, and I try to say, look, this is your life. You're leading your life. You lead it up to me. I will take care of your brother. You care about your heart. Let's start with your heart, because right now you're really envious of your brother. And then of course I have to, and I try to, the way I have this sort of hierarchy of relationships is the older ones have to protect their younger ones, and the younger ones have to obey their older ones. And I always tell them, you have to obey your older ones. And then I tell the older one, like, well, he's not obeying you because I don't really see you protecting him. And so, but it's that battle. And I think also because they're home so much, it's now they're finding outlets, but because they were home so much, they were just at each other all the time.
And that protective part might actually come into kind of what Tammy was saying, right? Where she has the older ones go at least into their rooms, and if you're able to have your older ones do that, it can be a way they're protecting him, right? They're protecting him by going into their rooms at bedtime so that he can get the sleep he needs and he can get the rest he needs for cognitive, emotional, whatever else. That is a way that if they're at least home, that they could try to protect him by, for that 30 minutes, going into their room while he's in his room trying to fall asleep, so he doesn't feel like he's missing out so much, since you do already have that foundation of obeying and protecting.
Yeah, we do say, go to your corners.
Separate corners.
Yeah. And then we also say that, we also try to, like you were talking about routines, I'm really trying to say, okay, this is the nighttime routine, and we're sticking with it. And this is, and I'm trying to stay really, stick to the time as well, which is hard on me, to stick with that time, but that's something that I've learned that I have to try to do for my kids' sake, or at least for the young people.
And it can be hard at first, but I commend you for that. Even if it's harder on us and we have to adjust things around, having that routine, I think might eventually weaken that battle with him as well, because it's just what you do. It's just what you do, right? You put a helmet on when you ride a bike, you put a seatbelt on when you're in the car, and we go to sleep when we need to go to sleep. But if he's not used to doing that, I think it could take some time.
Well, the other thing, sorry, the last thing, how do you keep them so they're pretty active, and I have one in sailing and one doing lacrosse, but when there isn't anything coordinated because they can't do any play dates really, especially the 8-year-old, what do you do? Like, so Tammy, what do you do with your 9-year-old? Or maybe your 9-year-old is so self-motivated that they're going out and exercising and biking and all of that stuff. So what do you do to get them out of the house to actually want to do something active?
So my girls were all active in dance, so like ballet, contemporary jazz, all that stuff. Well, that changed since COVID, and my son was in soccer and jujitsu. So all of that's changed, and we're trying to figure out a balance of how to be healthy, how to exercise, because it's important for all of us, and stay active. So just this week, so it's funny you mentioned it, Bambi, we decided Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're bike riding, and Tuesday, Thursday, we're running and doing push-ups. So that's what we've been doing. And yes, it's been a challenge because the time that we decided was going to be 7 o'clock in the morning because it's Vegas and it's really hot. So if you don't do anything before 8, you're just too, it's too hot. And so the challenge is getting them all up, right, to do it all. And so far it's been okay. There's been some struggles, but everybody's been biking. And once we're out, it's just like anything, right? Once you start, then you enjoy it and it's great. The hardest part is getting out of bed.
What a beautiful part to add to your routine. That's really cool. I like that. I also love what you said earlier about when they were younger, that you needed a break, essentially that we're human and we need breaks. I wanted to say, I thought that was great. And the letters I love, even my 7-year-old, I had her write letters to her 4-year-old sister if she does something, because there is actually clinically kind of a connection we have when we handwrite something. And it hits home more. It takes longer time than just saying, I'm sorry, right? You have to actually write it and put it into words and then read it to them. And so it does seem to kind of sink in a little bit more. So I love that you do that.
I think it helps on both sides. I think with the other person that's receiving that letter that's being read out loud to them, they realize that they probably made some mistakes too. And then they wind up apologizing for what they've done as well.
Absolutely. It gives everyone a moment to pause and really think about it.
Yeah. I love that. I think that you should also, especially with the younger one, you should let them write it just in their own words and the way they're spelling, because I'm pretty sure it's really funny to read afterwards.
I have a lot of funny letters that I've saved over the years.
I have my sons doing, I love that, and I'm going to adopt that, but I have my sons doing essays if they do something wrong. And I have one son who wrote about respect, and I think the first line was, I don't respect people telling me what to do. So I remember thinking, all right, this is going back, start all over again. And yeah, I mean, better now, but they all go through that. So, okay, so it's 12:40. I think we've kept everybody on. This was really fun. Tammy, thank you for joining us, all the time. And Liping, I'm not going to call on you because I know you like to listen. So, but we'll be back in 2 weeks and everybody will get notified, and Hillary will be back. And I guess we'll focus more on, well, I'm not quite sure, Hillary, because we talked who covered the gamut on this one. So
we did, but we definitely have an opportunity, I think, to dive more into routines with kids, not just as parents, and activities they can do, screen time, social media, all that fun stuff that comes up as a parent. So we will focus more on children, but specifically what are some activities they can do? What are some ways they can manage their emotions instead of screaming, right, or putting a pillow? So yeah, but of course it crosses over into us too, because it's almost one and the same. We're only parents because of them, so.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'm going to say goodbye. Oh, and mention what Dawn said, which is this is a season, right? So they'll
seasonal blessing.
Season, yeah. And so I will say goodbye to everyone on behalf of BetterHelp and Hillary and all the other therapists who have joined us. And we will see you in 2 weeks at 11 a.m. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.